Hey everyone, welcome, welcome. I'm delighted to see you all. I'm gonna minimize our view here so I'm not focusing on that. I am really glad to have you all here. I'm really glad to answer questions as we go along. So please feel free to ask them. If I don't see them in the chat, also feel free to hop on, just unmute yourself and ask questions because I know that you have a lot of them. So yes, I was in Hokkaido in the 90s. Here's some pictures of that. This one here in the top left is I did a study abroad in high school. And the bride in this photo is my first homestay sister. And then, yeah, a bunch of old pictures here. And here's my beautiful little view of Lake Toya. So I really know the point of this is I really know what it's like to come back from a jet experience and think, what the heck am I gonna do when I grow up? So I've been doing these JET alum sessions for a number of years now. So many, in fact, that this 15 years of experience piece on this is actually quite dated. I will fix that later. I've been doing this for a long time, is the point. And I work a lot with JET alums. And today we are going to do a little piece of information on resumes. And oh, I've just focused on resumes, and we have an interviewing section as well. So I will get to that, but I definitely want to answer your questions and get to the other pieces of question you have about like how do you figure out what you want to do and that sort of thing. But mostly we're going to focus on the resumes and the interviewing. So let's jump on in here with this. People ask me a lot about what to do with the resume when there's so many options these days. You can do really fancy versions on Canva. You can have images, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really a fan of a nice, simple format. Among other things, it doesn't confuse the applicant tracking systems, which I'll talk more about here in a sec. But it's nice because it's just kind of it doesn't need to change all that much. So you can get super fancy with a resume. You can have call out boxes and photos and little graphic icons and things like that, but you also really don't need to. So I go for a really simple format because it's much easier to edit. So as you need to add things, etc., it's just really simple to do it. It does say should save or should send the document in PDF or Word. Really, PDF is going to be the way to go. I have a couple little things about if you send it as a Word document in here later. But really, your best bet for submitting your resume so that it's always going to show up correctly is going to be PDF. I should mention that if you write it in Google Docs, you can do the same things as you can do on Word, but then again, you're going to want to ideally submit it as a PDF. Quick note, check your PDF before you send it because once in a blue moon, it does a weird little thing where it sort of bumps your page stuff around. So it'll have like a single line on another page. So just do have a quick check of it before you actually submit it. In a perfect world, you will want standard margins, which is the set of margins that either Word or Docs will preset for you. It's going to keep it from looking really crowded. It's going to keep it really easy to read, etc. I don't like a ton of columns in the document. Or one of those really fancy versions that has like a side column that has like your highlights and your contact info and all of that. Part of that is that the applicant tracking systems often can't read those. And part of it is that I think it just kind of looks busy. And we'll get to things like the length, the bullet points, et cetera, here in a sec. So what do you put on the document? Well, obviously you need to put your contact info in there. It says no header if it's a Word document, and that's just because if you do submit it as a Word or Docs, in a Word or Docs format, the system sometimes can't read your header on the second page, especially. But they can get confused if it's on the first page. So again, do a PDF. I tend to do a header in the actual format that I'm writing it in, because then your name is going to get onto the second page really simply, which is really nice. In terms of contact info, in a perfect world, what you'll have on there is a geographic location that does not have to be your full address. It can be city, state, zip, phone number, an email address, and your LinkedIn profile URL. If you don't have a LinkedIn, we can talk a little bit more about that, but it's a really nice way for them just to make sure that you're really a person, that you have the experience that you're claiming, that you're tech savvy enough to have something like a LinkedIn profile, all of those kinds of things. So, we can talk a little bit more about that as you all have questions, but start there and let me know if you have questions. I really like to have a summary or highlight section at the top of the document that kind of sets the tone for how you want people to look at the rest of it. It's not a rule, but I think it's a really nice way to capture anything that you've done that it might be getting kind of less attention than you want it to in the body of the document. And you can kind of throw some things on there that you just really want highlighted on there. And we'll get into some examples of this in a bit. Typically, your education can go at the bottom of the document, but there are some exceptions. So if you, for instance, work within education, people in education like education. So it makes some sense for it to be higher up in the document. If you are getting a master's degree or a PhD, or if you've gotten one very recently, you can then sort of shuffle that information up towards the top of the document. So really what you're thinking through as you figure out the order of things is what's most relevant to the position you're applying to. You get to make a judgment call on that because there's not really an answer. But that's kind of the way to think of it in your head. Now, if you have a bunch of experience that isn't related to what you hope to be doing, but you also have some very relevant experience, what I would recommend is putting that relevant experience right on the top so that anyone who's looking can find it very quickly and easily. And then under that, you'll have a section called something like other professional experience. If you don't know what you want to do, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. But what you can do is just put in a straight chronology and then kind of be poking around and figuring out what it is you want from this next thing. I really like bullet points on the document. I think that makes it really, the visual flow is more easy to kind of check in on. It's really easy to pull out the points very quickly, really easy to check in on like when you did something or where. So I go for the bullets and I like to start each one ideally with a nice strong verb. Now, the trick here with the verbs is if you are currently doing the thing, you put it in first person present tense. So that would be manage systems, oversee issues, right? Those kinds of things. I do sometimes see them when the verb is kind of written in the third person. So it says manages, oversees, etc., which reads really weird because it's your document. So why are you sort of implying a third person, right? Emily counsels individuals who blah, blah, blah. So do it in the first person. If you are no longer doing it, or if it was a one-off task, just put everything in the past tense. If you are struggling to come up with some nice strong verbs that aren't super repetitive, let me know. I have some lists I can send to you. But also, just check for some synonyms online and see what you can come up with that continues to make sense. Don't go crazy with synonyms. Some repetition on the resume is pretty normal. So anyway, play around with it, see what makes sense for you. When you actually have a measurable result to any of your points on the resume, go ahead and throw that in. The trick is that sometimes those points are hard to measure. And so what you might wind up with is something like resulting in self-reported higher confidence. Students who took the class reported that they were more comfortable with the English language, things like that. So it's not necessarily numbers driven, but it's nice just to kind of demonstrate that not only did you do the thing, but it actually had an impact on things. And try to avoid really listing those routine duties. I see loads and loads of resumes that say things like answer phones. Yes, I'm glad you can answer a phone. What does that mean in the bigger context of things? Hoping we're at a point in the world where everybody can answer the phone. So, did you multitask? Did you prioritize? Did you maintain a pleasant manner even when people were upset? Those kinds of things are a nicer piece to add in terms of accomplishments than just answering the phone. All right. Here's the other part of it. People get very confused about putting their JET experience on a resume and will often just put taught English, led students through English language exercises. And those are obviously things that you did if you were an ALT. But there's also a much bigger portion of stuff that you did that you're probably not tapping into. And so you can think about how anything you did when you were on JET really is a bigger picture piece of this. I will show you some examples here in a sec, but a lot of these experiences really do translate into other things or demonstrate similar kinds of skills to what you're looking for. I often talk about the skills trap here, which is really hyper focusing on those kind of nitty gritty skills that you've done in each job. So things like keeping a tidy work area, taking inventory, things like that. Those are not to be discounted, but they're also not things that are going to translate into a larger set of experiences. For something like a JET experience, you can also talk about anything you did that was sort of an extracurricular, um, if it is appropriate, if you want to focus on it, etc. And the last point here about not including stuff you don't want to do, pay attention to that because I have spent some time doing things like translation and I didn't like it. This is really boring for me. I just hated the experience of doing it. And so technically I could do some, but I don't wanna. And so I keep it very intentionally off of my resume. So think through what some of this might look like. And again, here's some, I'm going to stop talking in theory and kind of give you some examples. So this is actually something that I took from my own resume. So you'll see that among things in my JET experience, I have exceptional interpersonal communication skills and rapport building, as shown by experiences living and working abroad and facility with language. That's actually in my very top summary section of the document, where I want people to know that this is a thing that I did because I have this international experience. So it's a point that I have in that very top section of my document. And then further down, I have my actual ALT experience. It's in my other experience, but you'll see that I did things like demonstrated to high school students and English language teachers ways to internationalize and provide foreign cultural experience. Play with it, see what you come up with. I also created cross-cultural understanding through games and communications, blah, 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 right? So things like this that you can apply in a broader sense, or things that you want people to understand that you did from your experience. If you were a CIR, you're going to talk a lot more about things like kind of building those intercultural bridges through things like translation and, meeting foreign dignitaries and that kind of thing. So throw all of that in. Let me know if you have questions about any of it, but play around with this and I can send you some examples if you have questions about any of that. All right. Now, let me speak a bit to applicant tracking systems because, as you can probably guess, these are changing pretty rapidly as we kind of get easier pathways into AI generated processes for this. So, applicant tracking systems are essentially the robots that look through your application before a human being looks at it. There's a handful of reasons that these exist. The main two are that it's a really simple way for an employer to keep track of the applications they get for a position. They don't have to rely on keeping them in a single file or collecting them at an event and potentially losing them. And it can really help them cut down on the number of things that a human being needs to look at. So most people who have posted jobs will tell you that they'll post something, and if the salary is reasonably good, they'll get hundreds and hundreds of applicants. And that's far too many to look through. So the applicant tracking systems are designed to seek particular skill sets or accomplishments, or sometimes other things like years of experience, facility with a particular software, et cetera, and filter out the people who don't demonstrate that in the document. So that means that your task as a job seeker is to be sure that you're really demonstrating that so that you're going to get past the applicant tracking systems and into the hands of a human being. This can get very overwhelming, and there are actually some free tools that I'm glad to share with you that will help you get around those. The main one that I use is just called Job Scan. It's jobscan.co. Really easy to find, really easy to use. And what you'll do in that is you'll paste your resume in on one side and the job description in on the other. It tells you where to put everything. It's very straightforward. And then it's going to run a comparison. Then it's going to say what percentage match you're getting. And if it's not very high, it's going to tell you how to figure out what to do with that. So it'll say, you've gotten a 37% match, here's why. And so you go through and you'll see it's taking points away from things that the job description mentions 5 times that you've only mentioned 2 and that sort of thing. So it does hard skills and soft skills, which are words I hate. It also does some kind of overall formatting grading. So it'll tell you things like you're using a non-standard formatting, or there are images on the document, which the systems often can't read, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll give you kind of a nice overall score. There's 3 that I use that I'm glad to share. So, run it through those. The systems that I will share with you all are, they give a certain number of free comparisons each month, which is part of why I have 3 of them. Because if you run out, you'll want to have other options for them. You also, though, can rescore anything on each of the systems without it counting against you. So that's just kind of a quick note on that. The systems do change. They do update. Some of them have very seamlessly integrated AI into what they're doing. Some of them haven't. It doesn't really matter deeply because you'll be able to use your own judgment as you're looking through them to decide what makes sense in terms of the points you're getting subtracted from your document and what's ridiculous. So that's my little quick note on that. So basically, here's the summary of my tips on the resumes, and then I'm going to stop my share for a second, pop in and see your questions. So the first thing is 2 pages is absolutely fine. People will have very strong opinions and tell you otherwise, but the studies are really increasingly showing that it's fine for your resume to be 2 pages in length. Part of this is that LinkedIn exists, and your LinkedIn profile is just as long as it is. And so this is kind of informing how we deal with resumes. So don't make yourself crazy. If you're getting onto the second page of your resume, just go ahead and fill it up. Add more skills, add more history. You could list things like relevant coursework, extracurriculars, that sort of thing to fill up that second page. Go with a nice, simple, basic format. Save it as a PDF, submit it as a PDF. Make sure that you're really paying attention to what you think is more important on the document. And make sure that you're tailoring the resume as much as you can for each job or type of jobs. Now, I know that this is a lot of work. So if you are using some like a quick apply or easy apply option on a job board, primarily so you kind of stay in the habit of submitting your resume when you see something you could do, those ones you don't have to tailor. But when you find jobs that are actually really interesting or more exciting, definitely go ahead and tailor, use the kinds of language they're using in the job description, make sure that you're demonstrating the kinds of skills they appear to be looking for, etc. I know people are going to tell you not to worry about being honest on your resume, but they are incorrect. Just be honest, be straightforward. Don't make up anything that you can't do. Skills are often less important on a resume than you think because they're things that by necessity you can learn. So I have a thing here also that says include dates. This is actually a little bit optional. So recent dates, things like employment, definitely include those. If you've got a few years under your belt and you're getting concerned that there might be some age discrimination going on, you can take away dates from things like your college graduation, etc. But you'll want some kind of chronology in there so that they can kind of make sense out of it. All right, so I'm going to stop my share here for just a moment and get to some questions from you all. So let me pop into the chat there. Yes, the websites I will definitely share at the end here. I don't want to pop into them right now because I will screw up my presentations, but I'm definitely glad to share those resume comparison sites. So JobScan is one. There's one called Resume Worded, and there's one called Resi Match in the Cultivated Cultures website. So I will put those in the chat there. And yes, absolutely. This stuff is very much for US format resumes. If you are looking for questions about answers to questions about resumes in other countries, I'm glad to answer those, but do let me know in advance what you're looking for because I need to do a little bit of searching around. Things are kind of coming together a little bit more, so there are fewer differences in the formatting of the resume or CV, but there are still some really key differences, so you'll want to be sure to get those. If you're looking for work in Japan, I am always going to defer to Kasia over at Ikigai Connections in terms of things like the resume format, etc., because she really keeps a finger on the pulse of all of this, and she can tell you really what you're looking for. Let's see. So Maddie, yes, you can definitely, it depends on kind of what you mean by multiple roles in a single job. But what I usually generally advise for this is put in the employer name on top and then put your most recent role, put your job titles in boldface as opposed to the company name. So what you'll do is you'll have the employer, and then tabbed over to the right margin, you will have the full range of dates you were at that employer. And then under that, you'll have your most recent job and the dates for that and the bullet points. And then under that, you'll have the previous job to that, dates, bullet points. So that's kind of the pattern for that. I can show you an example. And then for the dates of the job, it's going to depend, Jessica. Many places are fine with just month and year. Anything that's government or does government contracting is going to want the whole thing is going to want ideally your some places are fine with just year. Some places want day, month, year. So it does depend a little bit on, and thank you for that. Yes, there's Kasia's information, Ikigai Connections. So it's going to depend a little bit on kind of what it is. I most typically do just year for experiences. Part of that is I don't remember the months, but part of that is it's just cleaner to have only the year. But if you happen to know your months, I would say, first of all, just go ahead and capture that on your LinkedIn profile so that you always remember it. And then your choice most of the time, how much detail you go into on the resume dates. Excellent. Oh, excellent. Yes, I love Kasia. She's very knowledgeable, super nice person. So yes, definitely connect with her, and definitely watch that recording if you haven't seen it. She's very, very helpful. And she did, I think it was her grad degree she did in Japan. So I always say she's not a jet, but she's kind of a jet. She's definitely one of us. So really good resource and very, very helpful person. All right. I'm going to get into interviewing here in a sec. But before I do that, are there any other questions or is there anything I have overlooked in my quick scan through the questions? Mm. Sarah, yes. Volunteer efforts are really nice to put in a resume, particularly if your volunteer experience is much more relevant to what you want to do. So if you want to be a botanist and you've been volunteering at your local botanical gardens, it definitely goes in there. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it, you can have a whole section that's specific to volunteer work, or you can call it relevant experience. You just have to give yourself the job title of volunteer under each of those. Um, and Victoria, for caregiving as a career break on your resume, I tend to avoid that. I know that there's a thing now you can do on LinkedIn that it says something like career break, and you can put the rationale for it in to your LinkedIn profile. The reason I don't like it on the resume is my general sense is that it brings up more questions than it answers. And so what I would do is kind of skip over that a bit on the resume, but then have an answer ready to go in the interview. So if they say, hey, so what were you doing in this span of time? You'll say something fairly general like, yeah, I had some family issues that came up that needed to be taken care of. And those are all taken care of. And now I'm really excited and ready to get back into the paid workforce or something like that. So yeah, so things like involvement with a JETAA kind of organization are really great to put on there. And that often will kind of cover some of that gap. So if you have been doing something like some family caregiving, but at the same time, you've been taking some classes or doing some volunteer work or something like that, I would kind of patch that over a little bit with those other pieces so as not to raise any concerns with them. I'll get into this a little bit more with the interviewing section that I will start here in a second. But one of the things that I think is really, really important in this process is try not to raise additional questions for them. So that means you're going to, as much as possible, avoid giving them too much personal information. Don't tell them your age. Don't tell them your marital status. If you have children, don't tell them your sexual orientation or gender identity. Don't tell them your religion, any of those kinds of things, because, okay, sexual orientation, gender identity vary from place to place, but the others are all just illegal questions across the board because they're about you as a person, right? If you get a question in an interview, I'll talk more about this, that feels kind of personal, you have a couple of options, but generally you're going to want to avoid answering those as much as you can. All right, I'm talking about interviewing already, so let me real quick share this
Let me make
here.
a quick comment, Emily.
Yep.
Just something practical. If you're
Hmm.
including a cover sheet on your resume, or I would, if you're going to put on your resume that you're detail oriented, don't
Hmm.
make any mistakes on your cover sheet, because I used to use that
Yeah.
to eliminate so many people. Anybody who said they were
Yeah.
detail oriented and they misspelled anything, that
Yeah.
was so
Yeah.
just pay attention
Absolutely.
to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is definitely one of those situations where a spell check can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So, regardless, even if you don't say you're detail oriented, remember that your application, the whole thing, is supposed to be your A plus effort. So have other people look at it, really as many people as you can. So that's people like me, that's your friends, that's your family, that's your super critical aunt. Whoever out there will look at your resume and cover letter, absolutely have them do it because it's very easy to have a typo in there. I years and years ago, I was helping to hire for a position at the university I worked at, and this poor fellow had that he had severed on several committees, and he had it in there more than once. And I was very concerned about that. I didn't want anyone severing anything. So definitely have a bunch of people look at it because, again, that's a word, right? If he had his grammar check enabled, it might have caught that because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I think he only had his spell check enabled. And so severed is a word. It's not the word he wanted, but it's a real word. So, yes, definitely do pay attention to detail on the front of things like detail oriented, good communication, etc. I would say also back it up. Yeah, pretty gruesome. Um, Back it up as much as you can. So instead of just saying detail oriented, you'll want to say something like detail oriented as demonstrated by excellent communication skills proven through or gained through, that kind of thing.
So the more action
All right.
words you can put,
A little more
in
action versus a little kind
numbers
of
or
proof of concept.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, excellent. Yeah, exactly. The impact of what you've done. Yep, precisely that. So, all right, let me get into let me not mute myself. Let me get into the interviewing section here, and then I can get to your questions about any of the rest of this. So, back to what I was showing you before. All right. Interviewing can be really, really intimidating. So what I always tell people in this process is to start by self-knowledge. Really understand what you want, what you need, what your skills are, what your strengths are, what you want to avoid, what you're not willing to put up with, all of those things, because that's going to steer you, first of all, in the direction of particular employers, and second of all, in the direction of the answers you would like to give to interview questions. So, really kind of think through all of this. Take some notes on yourself, really get clear about what you're looking for. And then, what I often tell people is if you're struggling with this, start by just listing your accomplishments. Put them in a notebook or on a piece of paper or whatever, but really start just listing your accomplishments. Now, initially, if you're not in the habit of this, you might start with ridiculous things, right? You might, I don't know, say, I promised myself I would exercise 3 times last week, and I exercised 3 times last week. They might be a little bit silly to start off, but keep going because you're getting in the habit of identifying and listing those accomplishments. And as you kind of get further into it, you'll start remembering some things you've done that you are really proud of. So, accomplishments, go ahead and list them. And as you apply for things, be really clear just inside your own heart and mind why you want the job. It's totally fine if your primary reason for wanting a job is that you want to get paid. But there's also something in that job description that made you think, yeah, I could probably do that. Write that down somewhere so that you're really clear on it so you can answer the questions. Why do you want this job is actually a fairly typical interview question. it can look a lot of different ways. But there a lot of times they're just going to ask a question like that, so you'll want to be really clear on it as much as you can be. And I'm happy to kind of steer you through any trickier conversations you want to have around that. But just make sure you understand a little bit more about why you're applying for things when you are. After you know yourself, of course, you will want to know a little bit about them. Who's the organization? Who are they looking to hire? Why is that position available? That kind of thing. You can't always find all of this out at the beginning of the process, but these are questions that you can kind of arm yourself with as you're going through the interview process. Some of it you'll get a sense of by looking at the employer's website and the kind of pieces of information they are really intentional about capturing in the job description. However, a lot of this isn't going to be super obvious, and this is where networking gets really, really important. It's actually more important from day one, but one of the things you can do when you're curious about an employer or a particular position or whatever is really get to know some of the people at the organization. The networking piece of this process is really key because regardless of everything else, if you don't know anyone at an organization or within like a professional association, you're when you apply, you're just kind of a glorified piece of paper coming across their desk. So the more people within an organization can say good things about you, the more people can say, "Oh yeah, I used to work with that person. I had coffee with that person." The likelier you are to get in to the actual interview. But don't be intimidated by networking. Um, it's really about meeting people, making connections, finding people who are genuinely interested. All right, on that note, if you know people within an organization or if you would like to meet them when you see a job posting, that's how you can begin to find out some of these kind of unspoken pieces. You know, what is the general culture of that particular position or the company as a whole? What does work-life balance look like there? All of that kind of stuff. Some of this you can find just by looking at the job description. You can kind of read between the lines to see what kind of person they're looking for, if there are particular skills they're seeking, if the organization has a mission. One of the things I'll tell you about a mission is if you poke around on company websites, you'll see that most places actually have one, but half of the time they're completely meaningless. It's clearly just a whole bunch of buzzwords that they thought were important that they just flung into a mission statement, and you'll read it and think, wait, what? So those aren't particularly helpful. But sometimes you'll read an organization's mission statement and it really resonates with you because they've actually taken a lot of time and energy to craft something that's actually meaningful. So check those out. It won't always give you a ton of information, but it's a good starting place. You'll also want to do a quick check when you're applying for things to see if this company has been in the news recently and why. And just because they've been in the news for a bad reason doesn't mean don't apply there. It's just something you'll want to kind of keep in the back of your head as you go through an interview process with them. But it'll tell you things like if they're working on something exciting and new, or if they're expanding or anything like that. It gives you a really good in. So if they say that they're expanding their market to Asia, you can say, oh, great, I actually have some experience living and working in Asia. I would love to be a part of an organization that does that. Things like that. Um, and as much as you can, read the info you can find online to learn what you can about the culture of an organization. Sometimes you will be able to look them up on Glassdoor. I can't get into Glassdoor anymore because I've been self-employed for 6 years, and I have answered all the questions I'm able to answer on the site about previous jobs. So the deal with Glassdoor is to get full access to the information, you need to provide them with information. So that can be like a salary range, interview questions you got asked, a review of an organization, your opinion of the CEO, something like that. I'm not crazy about the way they're doing it because it does kind of eliminate self-employed folks like me. It eliminates people who've been out of the paid workforce for a while. or people who took kind of a semi-retirement and are looking to get back into or did some caretaking, things like that. So I don't love that they're doing it that way, but they've been doing it for a number of years now. So don't worry if you can't get in there. You can figure out a little bit more about an organization by doing things like seeing what kinds of charitable organizations they support and what what they say in their description of kind of who they are and how they work. I can tell you that one of my, I don't know if that's a red flag, one of my cautionary areas in any company description or job description is if they say something about being family. Couple of reasons for this. One is the obvious one. Your family is not going to be super respectful of your time, right? If you're just part of the family, they're going to expect you to work way too many way too many hours, and potentially not have a very good work-life balance for you. The other thing is that family is often coded language for we don't want to pay for birth control for people who have uteruses, which I really hate. I think, and it doesn't apply to me anymore. I'm old enough that I don't need that, but it doesn't matter. The idea of it is always like, it really bothers me that they would be trying to avoid a basic healthcare expense like that. So things like that feel kind of off to you when you're reading a job description, embrace it because there's a part of you that is picking up on something that they are putting down that you should really pay attention to. In the interview process, there are a handful of kind of broad types of questions illustrated here. Some of these are illegal questions, as I mentioned earlier. The others I would just say to be generally prepared to answer. You'll often get a lot of these very open-ended questions. Tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this role, et cetera, at the beginning, which is funny because they're designed to be ice breakers, but they're often really hard questions. So, among other things, you will want to work through a quick little elevator pitch that you give at the beginning of an interview. This doesn't have to be something you memorize, so you don't want to sound robotic when you give the answer, but you'll want to have a few key points of your work history that you really kind of throw together in an answer to a general interview question as an opener. So that could be just whatever it is that you really want them to know about you as you're kind of getting to know each other. It can be whatever you want, but do try to focus really on the sort of professional aspects of it. People often panic in this question. And so I've heard all kinds of things about, like, you know, where people were born and where they grew up and how many siblings they have and that they don't like raisins and just all kinds of things like that. So do focus on kind of professionalism, meaning things that you, to the best of your understanding, relate to what you want to be doing. You'll also get some specific questions. Um, that's typically stuff related to the job you'll be doing, but you'll often also get some questions about things like time you spent in Japan, where you acquired a language skill, that kind of thing. You'll get some follow-up questions, which are the probing questions. I'll talk more about behavioral questions in a second. The illegal questions, I mentioned this earlier, people ought to know better than to ask illegal questions, but they don't always. I've had HR people ask things like, do you have kids to my clients? Not okay. If you get an illegal question, or if you get a question that feels overly personal, first of all, give yourself a second to think through it. And second of all, see if you can make your best guess about why they're asking it. So if you're just kind of talking and having a normal interview conversation and they say something like, do you have kids? Take a break, take a moment, and think, okay, well, the only reasonable reason for them to be asking that, reasonable reason, the only practical reason for them to be asking that would be something around my availability. So then you'll say something like, I am available to work some evenings and weekends if I have enough advance notice. So that's option number one. Option number two is, you know what? I'd be happy to answer that, but can you clarify why you need to know that? And then option number three is you can always say, I'm not very comfortable answering that. That feels a little bit overly personal. You can even say, I think that's not a legal question to ask. Third option is kind of my least favorite of them because you're kind of spanking them a little bit for asking you an illegal question, but it's totally permissible. Do whatever makes sense to you if you do get a question that feels overly personal. And then they may very well ask you salary questions. They're really frustrating. I wish they wouldn't. What I generally recommend if you get a salary question, particularly early on in the process, is you do some deflecting there as well. So something like, you know what, I'm willing to consider any reasonable salary. What's the range that you're hiring for in this position? Something like that. If they've posted a range, an increasing number of states are requiring it, which it's about time. Uh, if they have posted a range, you can say something like, the range you posted online, it works fine for me. Things like that. I would say, though, that it is in your best interests to have a range in mind based on what you're able to do and what you can find out about the job. So there are sites like salary.com and payscale.com and Glassdoor, if you can get in, where you can find out some information about salary ranges for where you are and the level of experience you have in the position. I think it's salary.com. When you get in there, you'll answer a bunch of questions about the job title and where you live and that kind of thing. One of the questions it has in there, though, is reputation. And don't panic like I did at first. When I first saw that, I thought, I don't know what my reputation is. I think I'm doing a good job. It's not asking about your reputation, it's asking about the company's reputation. So that's kind of how to handle those salary questions. Now, behavioral questions are often really challenging for people. So I'll talk a little bit more about these because these are the tell me about a time when questions, right?
Sorry,
These
Emily,
can be really
can I
overwhelming.
interrupt you just for
Yeah.
a second on the salary
Yeah.
point?
Go ahead.
A lot of
Uh huh.
times, they'll ask you, "What is your current salary?"
Yeah.
And I would not answer that either because that just means they're gonna give you 10% over that.
Yeah,
So,
and increasingly, that question about your current or past salaries is illegal. It's state by state. But the reason it's illegal is that it leads to salary discrimination. And so, if you're in a class of humans who have been discriminated against historically, that would be kind of the further away you get from cisgendered white guy, um, the more likely you are to have started off your career being underpaid. It's not across the board. There's plenty of cis white guys who are also underpaid, but it's a way for them to discriminate against you and a way for them to underpay you. So yeah, same thing. You'll want to deflect a little bit if they ask that. I wish it would just become illegal across the board because it's a really annoying question. But yeah, deflect as well. You know what? I'm willing to consider any reasonable salary for this particular position. The work I've done before isn't really relevant to this role. So I'd rather discuss the range that you're hiring for this position, that kind of thing. So yes, excellent point there. Thank you for that.
and
Um,
once they
all
offer
right.
you something, it's always good to, like you said, consider it, whatnot, but always come
Mhm.
back and ask for more
Yeah, and get
because
it in writing also.
especially if it's any kind of a sales position, because if you can't
Yeah.
sell yourself for more, you can't sell anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we can talk kind of in more detail about salary negotiation, but it's definitely something you'll always want to do, bearing in mind that part of the salary negotiation can also be around benefits. Excellent. Yes. So behavioral questions are the tell me about a time when questions. I think of these as falling into kind of five broad categories. I call them my five buckets. So as you're preparing for an interview, prepare stories with a beginning, a middle, and an end about these five things. Number one, times you worked as part of a team and very specifically what your role was. Number two, times you succeeded and why. What is it about you, your skills, your background that allowed you to be successful? Number three, times you failed and what you learned from failing. That one's tricky. Number four, times you worked with someone who was very different from you. And this can be a bunch of someone's or a single person. And how you define different from you, do whatever you want. This is a diversity question that you'll often get asked. And the point of it is just letting them know that you can work with a broad range of people. And number five, times that you had to deal with conflict. Bear in mind, conflict isn't necessarily a fight. A conflict at work could be you and somebody else were in charge of planning a party. and the other person really wanted Mexican food, but you were in the mood for Thai. Doesn't have to be a giant kind of ugly thing. A conflict is any kind of disagreement. So if you have examples of all five of those ready to go, write them down somewhere, have them kind of on a list, then you'll be able to answer most bullet point or most behavioral questions from your little bullet pointed list. So have those stories ready to go. I can send you more information on these as well, but those are kind of what your behavioral questions are going to be. Interviewing is stressful. Um, I used to say nobody likes it, but some people actually really like it. Some people really thrive in an interview environment. The trick to it is to try to stay as confident as you can. So, as you prep to go into an interview mentally, do a couple of little things for yourself. One is remind yourself of those skills and strengths. If you have kind of a crisis of confidence, go to YouTube and look up Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, Cuddy. She's the one who talks about body language, and she has a whole thing about how if you stand like Wonder Woman, Zara, if you stand like Wonder Woman for a few minutes before an interview with that sort of very confident, open body language, you're actually going to present a tiny bit more confidently in the interview process. So think about little things like that. Go through mentally and on paper a list of your skills and qualifications. You can have notes in the interview, and you can take notes in the interview. You've made contributions to organizations before. You have handled difficult situations before. You have skills, you have qualifications. So remind yourself of those as you go into the interview. Now, I do have be enthusiastic on here. Don't force it. If you're not a super enthusiastic person, you don't present in a bubbly kind of way, don't force it. You don't have to be. But you can say things like, yeah, I'm really interested in this job. This sounds like a great fit for me. So you don't have to be false in any of this, but you do want to let them know that you really are interested in this. And the remain positive one just means if you get asked a question that basically that your answer to is no, don't just say no, right? So if they say, have you ever worked with Salesforce before? You'll want to say something like, I've worked with these CRMs, not Salesforce specifically, but I know that Salesforce is actually designed to be very user friendly. So I'm confident in my ability to learn it. Sometimes they'll ask you about something that's actually a proprietary piece of software, and you can just say, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. What is it? And then you're likely to be familiar with whatever it does and be able to answer it from that lens. If you have an in-person interview, here are a few things you can do. So it says bring extra copies of your resume. You're probably not going to need them, but I do recommend you have a copy for yourself because in the heat of the interview, you might have a moment of panic where they ask you something and you can't think of the answer. You just drop your eyes to your resume, look through it, and think, oh, right, I've actually done that before. And so it's going to help you kind of frame your answers a little bit. If you do have an in-person interview, it's nice if you have something like some business cards ready to go. They may also in the moment ask for your references so you can have a printed copy of that ready to go. If you don't, you're always welcome to say, yeah, I will email that to you as soon as we wrap up here or something like that. If you have any kind of artifacts, as they call it in teaching, any kind of proof of concept, so that's letters of recommendation, enthusiastic thank you notes from people, anything like that. If you're a teacher and you have cute illustrations that your students have drawn, things like that are really nice to have as kind of physical copies of things. And if you're an artist or in a creative field and you have a physical copy of some things that are on your portfolio, you can bring that in as well. Some jobs are going to need a little bit of ID, which is why it has things like your driver's license in here. A great many of them won't, but it's always good to have a little piece of that in case you need it. It's particularly true if it's like a government job or that sort of thing. And depending on what you're doing, you may also opt to bring in some work samples. Again, often not something you'll need, but if you happen to have an example of something, particularly if you are in a more creative field, to bring in as sort of proof that you can do the things you've claimed, it's really nice. These are a little bit dated, so don't panic if you don't have these, or if you're not quite sure what to do with them. But your business card is a really nice thing to have with you most of the time, and it tracks very nicely with kind of Meiji culture. So if you don't have any, go ahead and just get 100 or so printed. You can get them for really cheap at copy shops, and then you'll just have a little memory jogger that you can hand over with that. Ideally, on your business card, you actually will have a photo of yourself. I know it makes me uncomfortable too, but the point of the photo on your business cards isn't to highlight that you're super cute. It's so that they can see your face and connect it with you as a person. And then you'll just have contact info. You can have a job title on there if you want, but really the contact info is the main thing to have on that. What does appropriate dress even mean anymore? It's a little bit up in the air. So I'll tell you, excuse me, I'll talk a little bit more about professional dress here, but the main point here is to prepare your interview outfit in advance. Obviously, if you are doing a video interview, you only need to dress your top half. I am 100% wearing sweatpants and fuzzy socks right now, but you want this part of you that shows to look appropriate and professional. If it's in person, you'll want the whole outfit, but professional really has a lot to do with the role that you'll be in. So if you're looking for a third grade school teaching position, you're not going to do well to have a $5,000 silk suit. It's going to look weird to them, right? So know kind of what the standards are within your industry. And the goal really is to dress approximately one level above what you would wear day to day. So if I were interviewing for a counseling job, I would probably have a similar kind of shirt on, but I would have a jacket and a pair of slacks and probably a pair of flats. Probably not my fuzzy socks. So that's kind of the idea with this. You'll want to do a little bit of research if you're not entirely clear about this. Look up the company's webpage and see how people are dressed on it. Look up industry standard for the position, see if you can get a read, etc. And if you know people who work in that field, you can also ask them. As much as you can, choose your whole interview outfit in advance and try it all on. Because if you don't, I guarantee you'll put it on and there'll be a coffee stain on some of it, or it won't fit you anymore, or you'll put it on and it looks really dated or something like that. So do put the whole thing on in advance. That also gives you time to, get it cleaned, to get a different size of shirt, whatever it is you need to do with the whole thing. If you are doing an in-person interview, make sure that you wear comfortable shoes to it because you may be walking around. You might get a tour as part of the in-person interview. So just, try them on, take a few steps, make sure that the shoes are comfortable. Um, I'm always a little bit on the fence about avoiding lots of bright colors. If you're just a really colorful dresser, you can have some bright color in the process, but you want to make sure that you're not like crazy over the top with it because it can be very off-putting. So what I say is your kind of perfect ideal outfit is going to be in kind of neutral tones, but you might choose a pop of color. So you might have a scarf or a necktie or a necklace, something like that has a little bit more color to it. If you really want to knock it out of the park, if you can find a way to mimic the company's colors in your outfit, that always goes psychologically a little bit of distance to be having them be really impressed by you. Your jewelry, you don't want it to be super over the top, especially anything that's clangy. You don't want to be making a whole lot of noise in the interview, other than with your mouth. So try to not have giant, kind of super over the top jewelry. If you're just more expressive, feel free to be expressive with your clothes and your jewelry. I often say this is kind of the most conservative version of you in the process. So if you are just a super kind of jewelry oriented person, wear some, but try to make sure that it's the least over the top version of it, the most formal version of you, like what your grandmother would complain about the least in the process. I'm not a huge fan of scents on people, and there's some scents I really dislike or will spark a migraine in me. So to that end, you'll want to be quite light and minimal with any perfumes or colognes you wear. Um, There are actually some workplaces that won't let you have them, particularly healthcare centers. So just know that before you go in. And, if you do want to wear a perfume or a cologne, do that thing my grandmother told me to do, which is to spray it and walk into the spray. Just make sure you're not like crazy strong with the scents. And don't go crazy with things like your tattoos and piercings, but if you have a lot of them, do a minimal piece of cover up of them so that that's not the one thing that the interviewer sees. It's much more normal these days to have more tattoos and piercings and to have them be very visible. So don't over worry about that. But you'll, again, just want to be the most conservative version of yourself for the interview as possible. Here are some clothing examples. You will still absolutely find the advice floating around out there that female identified folks must wear skirts or dresses to an interview. It's very dated. Don't worry about it. If you do choose to wear a skirt or a dress, you don't have to wear pantyhose. Again, very dated advice. Um, these are just kind of some images to get you thinking about how you would like to present, though, in the interview process. And you'll see this lowest one here, the one with the woman in the red. These are examples of kind of business casual. So if that is kind of normal for the workplace you'd be at, this is just kind of what it looks like. Don't make yourself crazy worrying about this, though. You'll want to go for something that feels to you like it looks appropriate and is a reasonably good expression of you as a professional. Ask for advice from other folks if you're not sure about this. And if you are kind of concerned because you can't afford a suit or anything, check out your local thrift stores. There are often some really, really good deals at those, and you're not necessarily going to have to buy like a whole fancy formal suit. What do you do at the interview? So this is, again, assuming it's in person. When you're you will enter the room and greet them. If it's on camera, you have the bit of advantage of their names already being on screen. Take some notes. Make sure you get the names of the people who are interviewing you so that you can thank them afterwards. And as appropriate, you can also address them. Let there be some small talk because I know it can feel awkward, but the small talk is really kind of how they're beginning to warm you up a little bit and try to get you to be comfortable and relax in the conversations. They will then launch into the more formal portion of the interview. And then at the end, they're going to give you time to ask your questions. When they say, do you have any questions for us? The answer is yes. Yes, you have questions for them. This demonstrates interest, this demonstrates enthusiasm and curiosity. So write down a list of questions you want to ask them, avoiding salary questions as much as you can. But questions like, what is the management style of the person who supervises this position? What do you enjoy most about working here? Et cetera, et cetera. So have a list of questions. I can help you kind of work through some of those so that you have a way to draw the conversation out and also get your actual questions answered in the process.
Don't ask them questions like, "How many weeks of vacation do I get?"
Yes,
or anything,
exactly.
because it's happened.
Exactly. You will negotiate that later on in the process. So absolutely, that's key. I do recommend a little bit of a debrief after the interview, and doing as much practice as you can. Now, I want to take a moment here to talk also about weird interview questions because these can be very alarming if you get asked them, but you don't need to panic. So, first of all, the thing I'll say is it is very, very rare for an interviewer actually to ask you a gotcha kind of question. They're not looking to catch you flat footed, they're looking for an interesting answer to a challenging question. So, you can find tons of examples of these online. They are things like if you were a pizza delivery driver, how could you use a pair of child safety scissors? If you were a flavor of ice cream, what flavor would you be and why? Um, how many ping pong balls would it take to fill this room, et cetera, et cetera. And these really depend on the kind of position that you're applying for. If there's a really big piece of kind of logical problem solving, you're going to get questions about logic puzzles, right? If there are, if the the human relationships component of it is really key. You're going to get lots of who are you questions. And so when you get an odd question, don't panic. Take a nice deep grounding breath. Do a little bit of, I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel my body supported by my chair. Okay. And then figure out as best you can why they're asking you the question. Oh, I see. This is a puzzle question. Okay, I know why they're asking me a puzzle question. And then you'll base your answer on that. Your best guess is almost certainly fine. And so base your answer on kind of your best guess about the rationale for it, but make sure you're telling them why if it's a who are you kind of question. The main thing is don't panic. And if you are in the interview and you feel yourself beginning to panic, you feel that kind of stress is going up like that, take a nice deep grounding breath. And this is a really cool tip. It's actually from the treatment of panic disorders. So you'll feel that anxiety rising. And what you will do is you will mentally list 5 things you can see without turning your head. Right. So that's, oh my God, I'm getting really anxious. I don't even remember my name. What am I going to say? I'm going to die. Then you're going to say to yourself, nice and quietly in your head, I can see my coffee cup. I can see my notepad. I can see my pen. You're just going to go through 5 things. And you can keep going if that doesn't calm your nerves down enough. But this kind of regrounds you in the moment and stops that kind of ruminating, spinning anxiety that you have going on there. Let me know if you want to practice interviewing. There's also a really cool tool on LinkedIn that will let you practice interviewing. If you have a LinkedIn profile, go into it, and then there's a tab at the top I think it says jobs. Click on that, and within that, there is an interview module. It's totally free. It's not part of the premium account. Go ahead and go through that. It's AI. So you'll get some feedback. It's going to ask you a bunch of typical interview questions, and you have the option to record it if you are feeling particularly brave and want to watch it back. So go through that. Let me know if you want to practice, etc. Practice with friends, practice with family, all of those kinds of things. Be a little bit cautious about the human tendency many of us have to overshare. They don't need to know a whole lot about you and your personal life. So stick to, as much as you can, stick to answering the question they've actually asked you. If you're not sure, if you get partway through a question and think, crap, is that what they asked me? Pause, say, I'm so sorry, I lost the thread a little bit. Would you please repeat the question? And they will almost always do that for you. Try to fake confidence, even if you're not feeling it in the moment. Try to be sort of warm and professional as you go through the process. Make sure if there's an in-person component to the interview that if you can, you physically go to the location at the same time of day, at the same time of week as the actual interview. That's so you'll know things like if there's road construction, if the parking situation is really complicated, those kinds of things. What the traffic patterns are like, etc. You can't always do that if you're getting flown in for an interview, but it's a really good habit to be in if it's in your immediate area. On time for an interview, FYI, means 15 minutes early. So do plan to be 15 minutes early. That also gives you a little bit of a cushion. So if you're heading out there, but there's like an accident on the road, you have that little bit of added time for it. I will often, for an in-person interview, recommend that people plan to arrive more like 20 minutes early, because that gives you that extra little buffer time to arrive, park, stop sweating, stop being nervous, and hop into the bathroom. Just check your teeth, make sure there's nothing in them, do your little Wonder Woman standing for a moment or two so you feel that little teeny bit more confident. Pop a breath mint if you've had coffee on the way there, whatever it is you need to do. Just kind of ease into it as much as you can. Eye contact, if you are online, means looking at your camera. So if you are kind of nervous about interviewing and you have a bit of a tendency not to look at the camera during your interview, stick a pair of googly eyes or draw a pair of eyeballs on either side of your camera lens, and that's going to cue you to make eye contact as much as you can during the interview. For a telephone or Zoom interview, you're going to want to pay a little bit more attention to things that you can kind of ignore when you're in person. So if you have a phone interview and you need a little bit of time to think about your answer to a question, make thinking noises. So you'll get a harder question on the phone and you'll say, "Ooh, that's a really good question. Let me think about that." Or you can repeat the question or whatever. If you're on camera, you just want to do a couple of little thinky gestures so that they know you're still there and your camera hasn't frozen, you haven't panicked and ended the call. So just be mindful of those things and do watch them for the nonverbals. It's much harder on camera, but if you start answering a question and you get a little bit of a them pulling away thing, pause, think about what they asked and try to reframe it a little bit. And like I said, do have that list of your questions ready to go for them. Prepare more than you're going to need for the interview because some of them they will answer in the course of just interviewing you. And you don't want to not have questions for them at the end of your interview. All right. So here's my contact info. I will share this again in a second, but for now, I'm going to stop and see if I can scroll through your questions here. All right. So, the family thing, it just makes me so crazy. I just like they need to stop doing that. Makes me crazy. I will actually also this is a personal thing, but I will say no to a job that where they tell me that they do a lot of drug testing because I'm pretty vanilla. I don't really take anything, but I'm offended that they care about that. I don't think they have any business caring about that. And I'm obviously it's fine if they have a policy that you can't be high at work. I don't have a problem with that. But I don't feel like they ought to be able to ask that about my personal life. That's a personal policy. I'm not saying you have to do it, but know what your values are around these things. Um, and one of the questions you can ask them, speaking of boundaries, is what the work-life balance is like at the job, because you want to get a sense of it. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes as you are asking them questions, things like this, the management style of the supervisor, what work-life balance looks like, what they like about the job themselves, you will get non-answers. So if you say in an interview, "Hey, what does each of you like about working here?" And they all say, "Oh, the people." Not really an answer, right? Follow up. Ask them a probing question of your own after that. Great. Can you tell me an example of a time the team really came together to support an individual? What specifically is it you like about the people? I love that you have an open door policy. Can you tell me about a recent time someone took advantage of that because they had a particular need? That kind of thing. So follow up. Let's see. um, Let's see. Yes, in most places it is illegal to ask current salary and pay history. It doesn't mean they won't, but in most places it is illegal these days. Thank goodness. Um, let's see. Um, what else? I'm trying to go through the questions here. Um, if you are good question, Sarah, if you're working with a recruiter and the recruiter asks your current salary, you can be a little bit more upfront with that person. So you can say to the recruiter, "Well, I'm currently making $55,000 a year, but I really want to get closer to 70." So because the recruiter's job is a little bit different, and it's going to depend on it's going to depend mostly on if you trust the recruiter, but there are other pieces to consider as well. So if it's a recruiter that you have a really good rapport with, if it's an external to the company recruiter, like a third party recruiter, those are folks you can be much more upfront with in the process. Oh, and thanks for the Amy Cuddy link there, Zara. Really good for kind of building up your confidence if you're feeling uncertain about going into the interview. All right. How important or relevant are references? Yes, good question, Maddie. So you will want your references to be pretty much ready to go, but you don't necessarily need to submit them in advance. I generally tell people to wait until they've asked for them. Now, the tricky thing is if you are freshly back from Japan, you may not have any English speaking references. I didn't. I had to ask my some of my faculty from undergrad to be references for me, and a person for whom I had done babysitting in high school because I didn't have any work references who spoke English. So your references are really important. You don't necessarily need letters of recommendation, but if you have them, they're a nice thing to kind of roll out to demonstrate to people. Um, your references can be anyone who will say really good things about you in a professional capacity. So I usually tell people, don't think it has to be your manager. Coworkers are often a much better source of that kind of information. And sorry, my dog wants some lap time now. And so the other thing is your coworkers can also often say more about you than a manager can. In a lot of workplaces, what your supervisor can say or a former manager can say is that you worked at the company from this date to this date. This was your job title, and whether or not you are eligible for rehire, which is a confusing and not super clear set of rules. So at some places, if you are under a performance improvement plan and you quit before you fix it, you're not eligible for rehire. At some places, if you don't give 2 weeks notice, you're not eligible for rehire. Most places, you're considered eligible for rehire if you actually haven't committed theft or fraud. But you'll want to figure that out in advance so that you can kind of decide who's going to be on your references. Coworkers are often really, really good people for that, though, because you can tell them what to say. They're your coworkers instead of your bosses, and they are likely to be able to have more freedom to say things about you. Um, Good references are really anyone who is generally well spoken and will say really good specific things about you. It's sometimes nice to have people with very fancy job titles as your references, but it's not a necessity. And you also can always say, please don't contact my current employer. It's not unusual. So you can certainly, to your question, Maddie, you can always put older references on there. Sometimes there's even a little box in the application that says, may we contact your current employer? Don't feel weird if your answer is no to that. It's really, really common for people not to have told a current employer that they're looking until things get a lot more serious. So you're always welcome to click no in that case. Let's see. Um, yes, and it's true that cannabis laws vary state to state. I am in Colorado. You're welcome. But federal government positions will often do some drug testing, etc. I just find it really invasive. Layoffs, don't worry about layoffs, Jessica. Layoffs happen. They're not your fault. You shouldn't feel weird about them. I don't know if my dog wants back up. He just got down. Um, so you're always welcome to say, yeah, I was laid off. Totally fine. It's not a red flag for them. It's a really normal thing. If you have been fired from a job, though, you'll want to have a story ready to go for it. And getting fired, don't worry. Getting fired is really normal. It happens to all of us. It's a little bit of a rite of passage. What you'll want to say is something about what happened, right? And so you'll say something like, yeah, there was a change in management, and we were just not a good fit any longer. I was let go from that position. Don't make a big deal out of it. It's a thing that happens. It's totally fine. Layoffs are a very different situation, though, because as you say, it's often the case that the company went under or got acquired by a larger company, resized things, whatever. So layoffs are not problematic, even though they feel very problematic to you as you're going through it. It's a really normal thing that happens, and you just say, yeah, it was unfortunate. I really liked the job, but I did get laid off. Let's see. Um, all right, Alexis, your current Japanese boss can speak English, but they're going back to Japan. Yeah. So you can certainly put people like that down as references, but if you can, I would back them up with people who are likely to be more available and on in a time zone that's closer to the one you're interviewing in, so that they're going to answer the questions a little bit more quickly and be more available on the phone. You can absolutely put them in, and it whether or not you kind of favor people like Japanese bosses or Japanese language speakers, some of it's going to have to do with if you're applying for a job that does an international relations piece or not. You can absolutely put them down. You can put down other coworkers as well. This is a challenge a lot of us face in particular because we have this weird chunk of international experience that many of our friends don't have. If you don't, for whatever reason, want to put down a Japanese boss as a or a Japanese colleague as a reference, especially if they're planning to relocate and will be less available because of that, you can absolutely look at older coworkers and friends. So whoever makes sense to you is kind of the guiding principle there. And so it's kind of a non-answer to your question, Alexis, but best guess, honestly, your kind of best instinct for how to operate with that is fine. Like I said, when I was first back from JET, I used people like my Chinese history professor because I didn't have any English speaking references. And that was kind of weird and awkward. I had to call him. Unfortunately, he remembered me because I talked a lot in class, as you can probably guess. So he was actually willing to be a reference for me. So you can get creative with this. And if you have a coworker who's more of a friend, that would be a really good person to ask for this because you can ask that person to say very specific things about you for the references. I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Zoom interviews. Yes, the photo that you signed up for your Zoom account with is the one that will come up. It doesn't matter. I mean, if it's a reasonably good photo, it doesn't super matter. Here's mine. So a photo like this will potentially show up on your Zoom as you get into the interview process. Don't over worry about the photo unless it's something really ridiculous. A lot of people have things like their pets or kind of a silly fun thing. People will have, you know, a screenshot of an event they were at, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. As long as there's not anything that would be concerning about it. We don't want a photo of your butt. Your photo is fine as it is, particularly because you are likely to be on camera the whole time. Now, that said, if you begin experiencing kind of little glitchy things with your internet connection, you can often smooth it out by turning your camera off. And so do make sure that what is showing up for you is a reasonable way to represent yourself. But people will have like photos of flowers or that kind of thing, and it's totally fine. Um, I like to have a nice little professional photo in my Zoom, but you can also make yourself overly crazy trying to work through all of the details of that. Um, let's see. Recommendation letters are really, really nice. If you can get them, they're a really good thing to have and can kind of stand in the place of a reference call for someone who either doesn't speak English very well or is going to be hard to get hold of because they're in another country, particularly as big a time zone difference as you get US to Japan. So yeah, if you have letters of recommendation, those are nice. They're not essential, but they're nice to have if you can. And I'm going to do a quick final screen share here so that you can see my contact info. Definitely reach out to me if you have additional questions about any of this. And feel free to keep the conversation going with me here. You don't have to keep looking at my logo. Other questions or anything else like that? Oh, thanks for that, Zara. Anything else that you all want to ask or anything else that that I haven't addressed that feels important to you? And there's my contact info. So yes, definitely feel free to reach out to me. If you have a specific question that you want to dig into a little bit more, best bet is to email me. You can send me messages on my LinkedIn, but I probably check LinkedIn 3 times a week, so there might be a little bit more of a lag if you send it to me through LinkedIn. Email is great. I will always answer your emails. If I don't follow up, because that means I got out of my email before it finished sending. So now it's stuck in my drafts. So email is a really good way to contact me. Definitely let me know. Yes, and you can always, if you ever lose my contact info, you can always reach out to your JETAA folks. They will always have it. US JETAA also has my info, so I'm pretty available. I try to be pretty available. And like I said, I am really, really glad to answer your questions. And speaking of, other questions or comments or concerns you all have? It's been a lot of me yakking at you, so let me know if you have other questions. Yes, networking so key, really is. Here, the full story of how I started doing these JET sessions was I reached out to Jessica, who's now the president of, or the whatever she is. She's the head of US JETAA. She was, at the time, she was the consulate person here in Denver who did the regional interviews for this area. And I said, hey, I think I miss interacting with JET people. I would like to do sessions with JET alums. What do you recommend? And she connected me with the folks who were presidents of the local JETAAs at the time. And I just started doing these sessions. And now she calls on me whenever she wants someone to do a presentation about career stuff. And I was just on a panel, when was that? 2 weeks ago, for USJDA. So networking doesn't have to be super intimidating or crazy. And this is a really fabulous built-in pool right here. The other thing I'll remind you is don't be super intimidated by people who seem like senpai to you, because we all have a lot of stuff in common. And most JET alums are going to be really, really glad to talk to you about what they've done, and kind of how they've gotten into career paths. So don't be shy. Reach out to them. I went to what was it? So some kind of career development workshop in Florida in, I don't know, 2018-ish, somewhere around there. And they had very specifically pulled in a bunch of experienced folks who were JET alums. And when it was time for networking, all of the recent returnees were terrified to talk to the older folks. I actually had to go kind of physically shove them. I was like, look, I know that these are your senpai, but they're here for you. They came to this event specifically because they knew you were going to be here. Go talk to them. So don't be freaked out by those of us who have years for you, including those of us who might have done our time in Japan before you were born. We're still really glad to talk to you. So hit me up, hit up anyone who seems really interesting, exciting, etc. Questions. First of all, let me ask you all this. Do you want me to show you where to find that interview practice module on LinkedIn? I can't tell if that's a yes, so I'm going to show you. It's really easy. Let me show you here. I have to pull up my LinkedIn, which you don't spell like lion. Okay, here we go. So let me real quickly show this to you. All right, so, all right. So obviously this is my LinkedIn. There we go. So here at the very top is where you'll find the little jobs section. So click on that, and it's right here under interview prep. Really easy. You get good feedback. It's super helpful if you're a kind of anxious interviewer. So go in and do that, and let me know if you have questions about any of it. But it's just a really nice tool to have available to you. So excellent. Any other questions from you all today? You could go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. I'm happy to answer them. Everyone feeling shy?
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Spencer Sexton. I'm alum based out of Ishikawa. I'm here in South in Indiana
Okay.
now. But anyway, yeah, thanks for doing this. And I was just going to ask about like when you apply for a job, there'll be like specific qualifications, experiences, etc. I've
Yeah.
heard some people say, okay, you don't necessarily have to meet every single qualification, so to speak.
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on that, and what are some of your thoughts to possibly even mitigate
Yeah.
some of the things you lack with other things as well. Just, yeah,
Yeah.
some of your opinions
Very
on
good.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're absolutely right. So here's the thing. By the time an employer pays to post a job on whatever, LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever, they've probably been through their existing channels. So they've asked their current staff, do you know anyone who could do this? They have posted it on a professional site, like a professional association, that kind of thing. So when they're going to post it, because they're paying money to put it out, and because they want to have a reasonable way to filter people, they're going to ask for the moon. So I always tell people to aim for sort of 60 or 70%. If you are mostly qualified for a position, or if you read the description and think, okay, I can do that. Yeah, absolutely. It's often kind of a wish list. Go ahead and apply. If there are big things that you feel like you lack, talk about what you've done that looks like that, right? So if they've said, we need someone who's super familiar with Microsoft Teams, you'll talk about how familiar you are with Zoom and that you have a Microsoft account and you're able to navigate that. So you kind of speak around it a little bit. And you can also use that top section of your resume to talk about the sort of general qualifications you have in terms of things like being tech savvy or being a quick learner, those kinds of things. Don't just say quick learner, though, on your profile. Have, again, like we were saying earlier, bear it out a little bit, right? Able to learn technology quickly as demonstrated by those kinds of things. So aim for that sort of 65, 70% qualified, and you should be able to get into the interview stage. But do think of it as kind of a wish list, right? They would love someone who has all of those qualifications and is willing to work for the low end of their salary range. They're probably not going to find that person. So you may very well be the most qualified of the folks that they're looking for.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer your question, Spencer?
Yeah, yeah, it does. It's like, I think like you said, by the time they put that posting out, it is kind of that like, we want somebody with 20 years experience,
Yeah.
PhD,
Yeah.
that
And you're
kind of
like,
deal.
yeah, why would I work here then if I have all that?
Exactly. And I see that you're paying 43K, so
Yeah.
super appealing. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just the way of it. It's kind of the nature of the process, so don't overly worry about it. If you read a job description, you think you totally do that, go ahead and apply.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Interviewers for U.S. companies. They don't necessarily, Sarah, specifically look for A-type people unless the field is very type A. So honestly, the way to kind of read for whether an employer is likely to be a little bit more type A, look them up. If every single person there is wearing a suit, if their language that they use to describe everything is very, very formal, if everyone looks extremely buttoned up, not going to be a fit for you. And so you can kind of figure it out. So here's my example of that, right? So I used to work in higher education, and most higher education professionals are pretty casual. We're faculty and we're admissions advisors. We're a pretty casual crew. And then I did a presentation for the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. It's the Air Force. Those people are all ex-military, predominantly former Air Force, which is a pretty, even for the military, the Air Force is pretty straight-laced. I was kind of alarming to them. I had to really be careful about not cussing in those presentations. And you could tell because when you go to the Air Force Academy's faculty page, they're all wearing their uniforms or suits. They don't look like regular faculty. And so if I were actually applying for jobs and I saw one open there, I wouldn't apply there because they're not a good fit for me. So the other piece there is filter for your needs as well as you're applying for things. This is two ways. So there are 100% tons of employers that only want type A folks. And if you're not that, you're not going to fit. You're not going to be happy there. You're not going to thrive, and you're unlikely to grow well in the position. So do filter out for that stuff as well. It was decades ago when I was working with a career counselor, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. She asked me what something is that would make me rule a company out altogether. And the answer I came up with was pantyhose. It's that kind of super formal environment, that like there's a bank of receptionists who are there to keep everybody out of the, hallowed offices of the fancy people, all of that stuff, that's just really off-putting to me. So I learned to kind of filter for those. And Sarah, if you're a more kind of laid back, chill kind of professional, look for organizations that are a little bit younger and a little bit edgier, and you'll find more of those type B folks in those kinds of positions as well.
And they're always looking for people that mesh with their team. So they're going to
100%. Yep.
as well.
Who you are matters in your job search. So be you.